everybody, welcome back to the shop. So we recently partnered with Milescraft, and they were good enough to send me a bunch of their tools to review. This will be the second video in this series on their tools. And the first tool we did was the drill block. Cool tool. Go check that video out. I'll leave a link in the description below to that one. But the next tool we're going to look at is the 8601 depth gauge. It's used to set up drills, set up your table saw, set up your bandsaw, fence depths, etc. Pretty cool tool. And for a limited time, if you're interested in purchasing one of those gauges, Milescraft is offering a discount by entering Vernon10 at checkout. Let's open it up. Let's see what it'll do. So there it is. Okay, so I'm going to do my best to go over this tool and try not to miss anything. So one of the things that we notice right off the bat is that it will stand there on its own. It's a stable little tool. It'll stay there where it needs to be set while you make your adjustments. Another thing that this tool has is this brass locking knob. Obviously it's threaded. You'll turn it to tighten it so that this will stay in place. Now, because I'm not using metric measurement, we can take that knob out, slide this scale out and flip it around, and now we're in the inch measurements. Put him back in. Don't put him in upside down. That would be a bad idea. Put him in so that you can read the numbers. Put your locking nut back in place. And then you can make your adjustments. Now, the scale is read off of the top of the device. So, having said that, if we wanted to set our saw blade at 1 inch, we would raise this up until the 1 inch line is in line with the top of the device. Simply lock it down, locate the bottom of the scale over top of your saw blade or whatever else you're measuring in, and raise the blade up. Now unfortunately, my saw, I am unable to lock in dead center on the blade because the blade, as it raises or rises up, moves in and out with the saw table. So what I typically do is raise the blade so that it is just touching the depth gauge. You can see that it's hitting the gauge. And then I simply lower the blade just a little bit until it passes through. Like that. Now you are at a definite 1 inch above the surface of that table. Take the gauge out of the way, make your cuts, make your adjustments, and you're good to go. With my saw, I will typically rock this blade back and forth and ensure that I have the correct height. More modern saws, the blade will raise straight. You wouldn't have to do that. You'd know where top dead center was. You'd have a line on your saw to indicate it. Put your device over that line and rock and roll. You'd be in good shape. Now that's the table saw setting for height. Okay, so here we are at my old router table. I made this thing myself many years ago. I'm not fortunate enough to have a nice fancy table yet, but maybe someday. At any rate, the gauge will work on a router table as well. I have this set at 1 inch, so let's make a more reasonable adjustment here. We'll drop this down to 1/2 of an inch right here on the top again. Straddle the bit so the bottom of the indicator is above the bit, and like I said, this old router, I've got to dial this in to bring the blade up, the cutter up, and you simply raise the blade until you're at the bottom of the scale. Lock your router in place, take this away, make your cuts, and you're good to go. Now this will also give you a depth off of your fence. So if you wanted to cut off of your fence on the outside, you could slide this in. Let's make this a little more realistic. You would adjust this back, slide this in until it engages the cutter on the router, then bring your fence into play. Okay, so here we are at the bandsaw to demonstrate how you would set up a fence with this tool. You could do it on your router or your bandsaw. You would take your adjustment, set it to what you're looking for, set it against your blade, slide your fence over in place, Once the tool engages the fence, you now have your accurate measurement off of the edge of the blade to the edge of the fence. Lock everything in place, pull your gauge away, and make your cut. Okay, there'll be times when you have a dado, such as this slot here. Obviously this is in the top of my bandsaw, but you want to know how deep that dado is. This tool will tell you that. Loosen up your brass lock nut. I'm going to have to put this in here on a little bit of an angle. But you can see that the measuring scale has dropped down. Lock the locking nut and read the measurement. That'll tell you how deep any dado is that you're trying to calculate. Then you can transfer that to your table saw and you can get your depth and go from there, because the bottom is now the same as this. So we're back to the table saw, and like I said on the bandsaw, you could find the depth of your dado if you wanted to fill that dado for any reason. Again, find your depth. Now you transfer the tool the other direction over top of your blade and simply raise your blade back up once more to the height that corresponds with the bottom of the scale. This matches that, matches this, and you're good to go. So now that I've showed you a few things that it can do, let's use it in a practical application. Some of you may recognize this guy. He's been drawn in a previous CNC video, and he runs around the shop here. This is Mr. Atlas. So let's take that depth gauge and let's make a simple half lap frame to go around his beautiful face. Let's go over to the table saw and see what we can do. Okay, so off camera I took the liberty of cutting the pieces to length. They're exactly the same height. And here's where the Milescraft depth gauge comes into play. So if you were to, let's say you didn't have a depth gauge, find the center of your boards to do a half lap. We're going to do a half lap in this case. And the way you would do this more precisely is with this little guy here. What you're going to do, let me step around here so that I can do this. Loosen up the brass knob. We know that these are 3/4 of an inch tall. Half of 3/4 is 3/8 of an inch. So you'll slide your scale up until you're exactly 3/8 of an inch here on the top. I'm hoping you can see that with my hands in the way. Lock the nut down. And now you have the exact height you need to bring the blade up to the bottom of your scale, and it will cut a perfect half lap because it will be exactly 1/2 inch, 1/2 inch, 1/2 the distance of the board. So now that I have that set, let me move back around the saw and I'll adjust the blade up, and we'll run this thing through the saw and we'll show you how it works. Alright, so we have 4 sticks of equal length. I've adjusted this to the correct height. I've got a spacer that is exactly the same dimension as these pieces of wood. And we'll set up our miter fence like this. Take the stock, put it against your blade so that it's touching the blade. Slide your miter up and you'll put a stop block in that's at the edge of the blade. Back that out. Take the spacer that you've labeled up so that you don't put it on the wrong dimension. Put that in, put your piece against it, make your first cut, remove the spacer, and continue making cuts, moving the board over until you've created a perfect half lap. Let's give it a try. Okay, 4 pieces. Let's flip every other one over and see how we did for a picture frame. Table saw is a pretty flat surface, so I don't think you could get much closer than this on a half lap without finding center using only that tool. That's much better. Okay, so there you have it, the Milescraft 8601 depth gauge. And at the end of these videos, I like to tell you whether I would purchase this or not. I most certainly would. It's a simple tool. It does multiple tasks. It's worth every penny. I would definitely purchase one of these. Always remember, Milescraft, always the better idea.